All right. So at today's webinar, we will look at the research problem and the solution bias. And we hope that the learning outcomes generally would be for you to get a clearer understanding of research problems and to raise the awareness that we live in a solution-based world and how that comes in to any part of the research that we are carrying out and how to cope with that. So specifically, we like you to get out a better knowledge of what constitutes a research problem in the first place. Then we quickly will look into the ease of the bespoke solution, to thirdly reflect on the solution bias and the role of habits in there, then to learn how to keep a problem focus, to move away from the solution, to understand the solution bias of search tools and in information, which I think is something that everyone should be well aware about. And then 6, to get a better perception on the difference between problems as such and research problems. So that's not unique to solutions, but since we are there and sharpen the problem understanding, we will also quickly go into that. And then towards the closing, we will take a look at the role of guides and the different lenses that you might have once you interpret those guides, like a solution lens or a problem lens, and how that will result in very different reading outtakes. And then, as said, we will go off the record and allow for open discussion and to reflect a bit about what we listened or discussed through the webinar, but also to provide an open floor subsequently, where you can put forward any questions that you might have. Now, what constitutes a research problem in the first place? And actually, we don't need to go into the doctoral level to understand that. It's something that every one of us learned once being at primary school or perhaps earlier to that. There's a problem and there's a solution. And I like the simplicity of this picture because it clearly shows how the two relate to each other. So a problem is what goes wrong, a challenge or an obstacle, like Sam hit his head and got a big bump. Now a solution, on the other hand, is how the problem is fixed or solved. Someone was nice and he gave him an ice pack. So Sam put it on his head and everything went out well. So the problem and the solution must fit together. They are closely tied to each other. They can't be separated. Now, the interesting thing is that was a very clear concept to us once we were that young. And then school kicked in, and then university kicked in, and then the workplace kicked in life generally, and we forget about that altogether. So a research problem is not a solution. Now, an example how this error often comes across. The problem is that we need, now you can add whatever. In this case, you need to reduce our high employee fluctuation rate. So you already come in with the outcome expectation, the bespoke solution, you want to reduce fluctuation rates. But why are the fluctuation rates so high in the first instance? I mean, what is the real problem here? This should be the question or the problem to be looked at. So a research problem is also not a question. Now, on the left side, you see 3 questions, which are perhaps good research questions, but they are not problems. So if you go through them, how does divorce influence children's social development? It's a very targeted question. What effect does divorce have on children? It's also a very targeted question. How will the aftermath of divorce affect humanity? Also a very clear question. So all clear questions, and as much as the solution relates to the problem, so does the question. Now, out of these 3 questions, there is one, which is the first, that clearly relates to the right-handed research problem, which is, for example, a recent study across the US has shown that the social development of primary school children of divorced parents is 2 years behind the development of children from non-divorced parents. The research question and the research problem relate to each other as much as the solution and the problem, but they are distinctly different. Likewise, often a problem is framed in the form of a title or a topic, like in this case, side effects of chemotherapy. Now this clearly shows an issue, and it might be a well-placed title, but it's not a problem statement as such. A problem statement that relates to that is presented in the below. Nausea and vomiting are common side effects among patients on chemotherapy, and interventions to date have been only moderately successful in reducing these effects. New interventions that can reduce or prevent these side effects need to be identified. So the problem is clearly shown, and it relates clearly to the title. Now, an example that we often see how problems are framed is reviewing the market positioning strategy to understand how nonlinear organizational factors affect the effectiveness of the organizational capabilities. Now, this in itself is a fairly clear title, and presumably the student has taken quite some effort in formulating that and getting it up to that level of detail. However, in the form it is put, it is not providing a problem statement. A problem statement can be very well derived from that. For example, the current market positioning strategy appears to affect the effectiveness of the organizational capabilities. So that is a relating problem statement to the title. Whether or not it's a good, we leave that out, but you can see a clear match in between the first and the second. So there's a clear relation in between title and research problem, as is the case for solution and research question. And as we are there, all of the four, the research problem, the research question, the outcome expectations, and the title are all together related and must fit. Further to that, a research problem is also not an opinion. An example, we need to write more funding proposals since 9 out of 10 funding proposals do not make it through. We need to get at least 5 proposals funded per year. Therefore, we need to write at least 50 funding proposals. So how can we motivate our scientists to write more funding proposals? Now, this was the reasoning of a colleague with whom I worked together, and it missed the problem entirely. I mean, if only 1 out of 10 makes it through and 9 out of 10 fail, then we have a deeper issue. Why do they fail? Why aren't we capable to deliver higher quality? Why don't we manage to live up to the expectations? So that should have been the focus. While my colleague, the entire time and her entire day focused on, we need to write more proposals. Right, good. So obviously the quality never got better. So you can see an opinion and a wrong focus can lead you to a very wrong way. On the other hand, if you manage to establish a clear problem focus, then you can derive from that clear research questions and work in a very logical way forward. Now, what are the characteristics of a research problem? Well, ideally, it's a situation that is broken. So you can look at something and see it and understand it. And it should ideally also show some cause and effect relationships so that you can see, okay, that hammer was breaking that window. Not always that's possible, or not always at the start that's possible, but you might want to try to uncover what are cause and effect relations in there. And you need to have some boundaries. Now, boundaries are nothing that come. Boundaries are something that need to be established by you, by related research, by anyone. So it's something that you need to put in place to have a research problem that can be handled. And a research problem is real, not abstract or hypothetical, which is also very important. And it's based on ideally initial observations and evidence. And it can be the starting point of the research process or the end point. So if you understand the problem fairly well, then you might want to look for what is causing that problem. So then that's a very different way of carrying out your research than if you are just in a situation that you feel is not right, but you can't really tell why. So then getting a clear problem understanding would be the first objective of the research. You might go further afterwards, but the first point would be to get a clear understanding what is the situation here. Okay, before we come into the second part, are there any questions on the first? Okay. Now, contrary to the problem, which is very nebulous, the bespoke solution is something very clear. It's a well-known concept. We understand it because we on a daily basis deal with solutions. Solutions is what we get from morning till evening. We go to the supermarket, we buy our cleaning detergent, we afterwards take our dirty shirts, we put it in the laundry, and out it comes, white as it should be, right? And ideally it's sunny and it's dry in the evening. So this is how our day is organized. The solution is omnipresent, we know that very well. Now, from a consumer perspective, in this case, what is the solution? Well, it's quite obvious, isn't it? Remove any stain. Whatever is on my shirt, let's get off, any. Yeah, that's what promoted here. You can get any stain off. It couldn't be more simple than that, right? You go to the supermarket, you buy that, and it gets any stain off, whatever that stain is. Now, from a producer perspective, the marketing message is perhaps very easy, but how is the producer assuring that any stain gets off? Now, if you look into the advertisement of that bottle on the right side, you see 7th generation. Hey, so there's some work already in there. I don't know if the 1st generation also got any stain off. I mean, if they need a 7th generation, either the any has developed into any real, or I don't know. No, there also must have been a limitation of the power of the liquid, because you see here power plus. So what initially was thought to be powerful, in hindsight, was not the most powerful, right? So there's a power plus. If you look at energy labels, then you will see them updated each year. So what was 20 years ago to be very efficient, today is like very dirty. Now this year's power plus. Now, and perhaps the most important, 6-time cleaning agents. Removing enzymes and surfactants were discovered. Wow, 6 different. That's a huge number. So from a producer perspective, there's much more in there than from a consumer perspective, who just buys any solution. And if we look at that same situation from a research perspective, if we see it's a 7th iteration, wow, that's good for 7 research projects. Now, if you consider a research project perhaps taking 2 to 4 years, that's a long time frame. And if we look at that from a PhD research perspective, the limitation of getting from power to power plus likely will do enough for a given PhD research, right? Perhaps you need even more than 1 PhD to get that out. And 6 strains removing enzymes and surfactants, wow, that could fuel an entire research group, if not more. So you could have 20 or more research students working on that. So it's far more complex if you look at the same situation from a research perspective. Now, what I find most interesting is if you talk with a PhD student at the start, what will be the outcome of their research? Likely the answer is a liquid that will remove any stain. You see? You get the message? So if you come to the same topic with a solution lens, things look very, very easy, very, very smooth, while they're perhaps not. So depending on whether we carry a solution lens or a problem lens, we will look at things very differently. So having looked into the different concepts of problem and solution, are there any questions to that point?
Yes.
Please.
Hi, good morning. It's Avinand again. Just a quick question. Okay, so the research question, I gather is a subset of the research problem. And does the research question have to contain your variables as well? I know it would contain your boundaries, but should it contain your variables that you're going to be testing a hypothesis on?
Well, this is a bit of a question and answer, chicken and egg situation. So do you know at the beginning already what are the variables or not? I mean, if that's a starting condition, if it's part of the problem framing, then it likely will be within the research question. If it's part of what you presumably would want to uncover, so it's getting more into the answer direction, then likely the question is framed more broadly. So it is exactly, is a problem the starting point or is a problem the end point type of situation? If you know the problem very well at the beginning, so you know the variables that you want to look into, then they will be part very likely of the research question. If that's not the case, so it's getting more into the answer direction, then the research question would be framed more broadly. The interesting thing in here, though, often you can't tell that really at the beginning. So this is something we have a dedicated webinar on that, how the research question evolves over time and how one might want to deal with that situation. Because whatever question you have now, you should still know what it was in 2 years or 3 years or 4 years from now. And you should be very well aware how that question has been changing based upon the knowledge and information you gathered. And only at the end, very likely, you will get to the final research question as it's stipulated in your thesis. But to answer your question more simple, yes, the variables should be in if they are known at this point in time and are part of the starting point. If that does make sense.
Yes, it does. And thank you very much. What you've said has given me some interesting things to think about too. Thank you.
Great. So what is the issue with research problem in contrast to solutions? Now, as I said from early on, we are raised to solve problems. All the tinkering, inquiry, and exploration of the early years is gradually educated out until we graduate from school. We are trimmed to work towards solution or to improve something, not even knowing why there is a need for improvement. So once as a doctoral student, we draw on this day-to-day experiences and practice, and this makes us struggling once attempting to craft a research problem. So if you go back to the roots where you have been in kindergarten or primary school and understand what is the concept of a problem, that will help you very much in formulating a research problem. Now, another thing is that solutions are exciting and, as we saw, easy, while problems are not. And especially those where you are part of creating it, even the ideas behind, we are not only implementing a new solution as an intellectual turn-on, ego boost. So the solution bias is very common amongst those of us who are solution consultants or who are working. And we need to be aware of that, and we need to know how to deal with that. So the very fact that we know there is a solution bias can help us to distinguish in between what are we looking at? Is it a problem or is it a solution? Now, and it's not only more exciting, but it also triggers us to act. That's something that is common to see in doctoral students, the quest to act, to rush into building a solution. And if the solution is only a questionnaire, but there's a rush into action. So it's not that it's bad to rush into that, but it's bad if we do it quickly and if we are working towards the wrong thing. So why do we need to come up with those questions? To what problem do those questions belong? Can we answer that? So these are things we need to make sure. Why do we need to answer that? To what problem does it belong? So this is something to watch out. And the worst thing is once this excitement means opportunities. For example, everything now in the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, you name it, everything's digital. There are so many opportunities. But what are the real problems there? Do we understand them? And if we look for opportunities, usually opportunities means quick acting. So again, the action is triggered rather than the reflection. So this is sort of the perfect storm to move you into the wrong side. Now, how then do we keep a problem focus? I think a simple answer to that is if you stay at the dark side. Dark in the sense of you don't feel comfortable there. It's not cozy. It's not meant for you to be there. You don't want to be there. I mean, everything that solution is bright. Everything that is not is exactly on the other side. So whenever you feel uncomfortable, once it takes you time, once you need to think a lot, likelihood is great you're on the right side from a research perspective. You're looking at a problem end, something that is not understood, something that just makes you naturally feeling uncomfortable because you don't know what is the outcome. So this can help you to understand whether or not you're working on the correct end. Now, in other words, the recommended path for filling out a lean canvas is starting with a problem customer segment trend. But if you already carry a picture of a hammer in your head, the danger is framing all problems as nails. Instead of brutally forcing your solution, reframed as problems, on your customer segment, start by defining the bigger compelling context for your customers. So check what side you're on. And what I like in this quote in particular is a reframed as problems. And if you look through a lot of doctoral theses, there's really the tendency to avoid naming the problem at all. There's chapter 1, the problem statement, which talks about everything else but a problem. And from that moment on, the student always references back to as put in 1.3, the problem, and then goes further to talk about a solution. So avoiding the naming of the problem is a clear indicator of not having a problem worked out. And the likelihood is great, rather working towards a solution. So how to focus those old solution-based habits? There are a number of hints. Focus on the context. So what are you looking at? Not the tools, what you want to do. Reflection instead of action. Exactly. If you look at a problem, it will take you time to work over it. So don't just rush and act. Critical analytics instead of beliefs and desires. So what are we looking at? What are the evidence pieces? What are the information? Yeah. Take out beliefs and desires. A process focus and not an outcome focus, which is very important. The outcome focus is exactly what you intend to achieve with your thesis. The process focus is what are we doing here? Which type of analysis are we doing? Why are we doing that? Then work over questioning rather than concluding. Stakeholder engagement is also very important and not relying on expert groups. It's not author A says, author B says, therefore we do that. No, we engage with stakeholders to balance what we know from the literature. And there will likely be many, many more things. But do not rush is really one of the key recommendations, because whenever it's quick, then the likelihood is great. You are just randomly trying to get a solution in place rather than thoroughly working through a problem-based, analytical, focused research. So I think that is the best way for controlling yourself where you are. Now, any further questions for the past two sections before we come to the information bias and search tools and information? Okay, so it occurred to me some time ago, once I was searching, why some search results were very, very low. So once preparing this webinar for the first time, some years ago, I searched for solution bias. And Google really wanted to tell me there are only 8,680 hits. Now that hit me. So I Googled a bit and tried what would I get with business solutions. So I got significantly more. And then I thought, okay, what if I try a sort of nonsense term, like a solution business? And I still got 3 million hits. Well, that's considerable if I compare that to 8,680. Now, as a novice researcher or outsider, how likely is it to develop a solution bias if you're just new making it into your research field? I mean, you not even know perhaps that the solution bias exists. So then if Google just tells you 8,000, then that's rather like, oh, misspelled. Business solution, on the other hand, gives you a credible number of results. Yeah, let's look into the case, what is a solution business? Those were by that time the first hits that Google produced. Success in solution business starts by, so apparently it's an established business type, a solution business. I never come across a solution business, which sounds generic to me. I mean, every type of business wants you to get a solution, right? You don't see something like broken cars on sale here. Well, then, as a business model, it was also put forward. What does a business solution company do? So there's even discussion going on there. Humans discuss that apparently. Business branch or a market? I mean, the last suggests that Bridgestone apparently has a department working on that, which is called solution business. Okay. Now, I think it's important to understand that any type of information that you're looking for at the internet is framed by solutions, because this is what generates hits. This is what algorithms are made for. They are not made for putting you into problems. They are made for showing you solutions. And even if you look for it, usually the word problem comes with a problem solution focus. Right. I love that, problem solution focus. So how much thinking goes into the problem and how much into solution? Well, 10 seconds into problem and the rest is spent on solution. Now, again, there's not much you can do about that. That's how the internet works. That's how information is structured. The only thing is stay on the dark side can help you. And well, if you only get 8,000 hits, yeah, then perhaps that's still good enough for what you want to find. So don't be put off by search engines and information at the internet. So as we are there, and before we come to an end, a note on problems and research problems, or are there still any questions on the internet search? Good. So since we got a bit more into what is a research problem, let's now also distinguish it and put it in contrast. So there are problems and research problems, and there's a difference in between that. While the problem to you might bother you, it might not qualify as a research problem. Now, if we look at bankruptcy, this is your problem. You go bankrupt, but most legal frameworks are made for you to go bankrupt. Yeah, that's part of the system, how it's designed. Fraud, on the other hand, is not. So fraud is a research problem. Bankruptcy as such, not. But if the bankruptcy was caused by fraud, then obviously the situation would change, as fraud was not meant to be a formal process, and as bankruptcy is a consequence of fraud. So there you have a research case. So please understand there's a difference in between a problem as such and a problem to you. Okay, final part. The different lenses that we might have once we read through guides. Now, what is the issue with the guide on the right side? Let's look at it. A guide to problem solving from Emerald Publishing. Problem solving is bringing a group of individuals together to analyze a situation, determine the real problem, look at every possible solution, evaluate each of the solutions, and choose the best one for that purpose. Does anyone want to tell me what's the problem? I mean, it starts out, determine a real problem And then it immediately flips, look at every possible solution, evaluate each of the solutions. So yeah, as said earlier, how much time would be spent once you talk about problem solution on the problem end and how much on the solution? It took the first sentence not even to move away from problem toward solution. And once you will read the guide, the likelihood is great. It is written in the same way. So what you're interested in is not what the guide will provide you with. Now, it's not that those authors likely will do that intentionally, because they are experienced scientists very often, and they know how science works. And therefore, for them, it's clear what is the problem, what is the solution. So the way they write it is perhaps not the way you read it. And this is important to understand. Now, to make it worse, many resources on problematizing and problem statements suggest you to consider things that you simply don't know, at least not once you start. For example, how can you tell about the significance or the background of an issue if you still haven't fully understood the issue? On the other hand, what you do know is the outcome expectation, which is very clear to you. Like you know that cleaning detergent that you want to have that removes any stain, right? But you don't know how it is composed. So this is a thing you, again, need to be aware of, because it will bias the way you read things, be it guides or any other literature, because you know much more about what you want to get out than what it is really that you're looking at here. Yeah. If you want to study that more thoroughly, take a look at our advanced training course on issue identification, problematizing, and research question framing. There are 8 tasks with a lot of literature sources. They are all openly available, so no cost, no charge on that. It comes in 3 study formats: free self-study, fully tutored, or with flexible on-demand feedback where and when you need it. And with this, we go off the record and open the door for discussion. Let me finish the recording.